All right, let's go ahead and convene the meeting, the Land Use Committee meeting of October 4th, 2023. Let's do quick introductions. I'm Scott Diener, Councilmember Chair.
I'm Fred Chang, council member.
Jay Rose Pepe, council member.
Port Orchard Mayor Rob Pagansu.
Community Development Director Nick Bond.
Jim Fisk, senior planner.
All right, any additions to the agenda or modifications to the agenda?
I think just because everybody may not have trickled into the meeting yet, we should remind everyone that a revised agenda was sent out today with an additional item attached to it. So there's a Diaz Meadows development agreement that was sent out this afternoon. That is item number 4 on the agenda.
Right. Okay. And then the only thing that I would add or ask about is at the end of the meeting, if we could get an update on where we are with signs. Nick, you know that it's been a bugaboo of mine about what signs are doing to Kitsap County Port Orchard and Kitsap County. It's interesting. You drive through some of the areas and it's pretty polluted. Okay, let's talk about the annual suggested code amendments. Thank you, Nick, for the or Jim. Thank you for the table of code amendments. And let's go ahead and talk about them.
Sure. The docketing procedure for the suggested code amendments is consistent with Port Orchard Municipal Code 20.06. Involves organized submission and prioritization of proposals from various stakeholders. Proposals are collected by DCD annually before September 30th. We review these and assess the proposals for feasibility, alignment with city goals, and compliance with the municipal code. The docket is then prepared, listing proposed amendments by classification and the entity submitting the proposed amendment. Each amendment includes brief descriptions. In some instances, the proposed revisions are minor in nature, correcting typographic errors or updating references, but others impact development standards and administration. The Land Use Committee should review and evaluate the proposed amendments based on priority, feasibility, and potential impact. The finalized docket will then be presented to the City Council for approval, signifying acceptance of the prioritization and scheduling. The table included in this afternoon's packet lists suggested code amendments received from the public and city staff, focusing on aligning regulations with evolving needs and responsible development. DCD recommends the approval of these amendments, intending to integrate them into the ongoing comp plan periodic update work, which we anticipate to conclude by December 31st, 2024. Integrating this ensures alignment with broader city objectives, state legislative mandates, and the ongoing comprehensive plan update. Staff's recommendation to the City Council is to approve the 2023 Code Amendment docket and incorporate it into the 2024 Comprehensive Plan periodic update.
Jim, can you share your? I didn't get the packet, so I don't know what table you're talking about.
Well, that's hang on just a second. Share.
I have it handy if you can enable sharing.
Oh,
sure.
Yeah, the packet was sent out last week and then amended today, just before 1.
Oh, 1246. Okay.
But that 1246 was just the addition of the 4th item. The balance of the packet was sent out last week from Jim.
That one, I only got the agenda.
It's also online.
Yeah, if you can just show it online on just share your screen.
Yeah, I've got the packet open. Hang on.
Here's the table, and the big difference this year is we typically don't get applications from the public to amend the code. So this year we did receive 2 proposed amendments having to do with minimum parking standards. And is the use that's associated with, Jim, is that the congregate living?
That's correct.
So we had a proposal from a member of the public to change the parking standards for congregate living. And then we also had a list of housekeeping items that we typically bring forward our housekeeping ordinance every year, but because we had an application from the public, we're rolling it into that public process.
Just so for my own awareness, who's John Williams?
John Williams, a neighbor to the Michi House conditional use permit for the converting that church into a congregate living facility, and he was concerned that we allow congregate living without adequate parking.
That was
there.
That was what I thought. Okay.
Property across from it.
Okay. Well, I didn't have any, I had one comment and well, a couple questions, I guess, more than comments. So under the second one where it says create exemption for building permits, or sorry, for public buildings, such as pump houses and lift stations, if they're not visible from the right of way from design standards. Do we clarify anywhere that these public buildings are really accessory? Do we make it clear that public buildings, in other words, are not the larger public buildings you might see, occupiable spaces, offices, etc.? Is it clear that these will only be for those incidental or accessory uses?
Like utility infrastructure buildings. Is that what
Yes.
you mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Jim.
I think that's the intent of this. Not if
Okay.
we're going to build a new city hall, obviously, I don't, maybe speaking out of turn here, Nick, but I don't think we would exempt it fully from design
That's-
standards.
That's my not my concern, but I just want to make sure that that's clarified when we do implement this code change. Or not
Yeah,
clarified, but it's
and-
clear.
I think you're right. It does need to be clear, but I will point out that when we do design of public buildings, we have to do qualifications-based selection for who we hire to design a building. And typically there is a public process associated with that. And the design standards that we have really are not written to address how public buildings look compared to how private buildings look. So when it comes to designing something like the county courthouse or city hall, we really don't have good design standards to address that type of building. And so there may be merit to saying just that they don't apply to those buildings, but maybe it's provided we have a public design process. So we should think about that a little bit more as we refine this. Once these amendments start working their way through the process, we will make note of that and consider it.
Okay. And then the other comment is I went to the parking standards and code, and it looks like the first change he's proposing doesn't really change parking, but that the second change just clarifies parking and maybe increases parking with that clarification. I wasn't totally clear on that, but that was my impression.
Jim, are you able to elaborate on the parking standard? I think the distinction was that we had a 0.25 per unit of housing, not per bed. And in a congregate living, you're providing beds. Is that it, Jim?
Yeah, in the parking table, there's actually not an amount
Yeah.
associated with congregate living.
Right. It was blank.
The definition of congregate living, it only allows it in designated centers, and it has to be within a quarter mile of transit. So I think when we developed that portion of code, the intent really was for people to rely on transit to get to and from, and not burden a development with having to provide a large expanse of off-street parking. But Mr. Williams has indicated that he would like to see this measured by bedroom, or by bed rather.
Adding on to this conversation related to this, what effect is, Amici House got their conditional use permit.
Yeah,
and
in this,
changed this after the fact.
in this instance, and I think Mr. Williams doesn't quite understand that the Amici House is essentially vested to that standard. I think he's under the impression that if this code amendment were to go through, then Amici House would somehow stop and have to provide that off-street parking. This would only impact those new applications that come in after adoption.
I think this is a great reuse of an existing building that's been vacant for 10 years or more.
I also think that it would stop people from wanting to do housing like this. And I agree with you, Mayor, that this is, it almost sounds punitive to me.
Provided that under the, like Jim said, we've got to be within a certain distance from transit amenities, because we don't want these folks to all
Yeah.
have a car.
Yeah, this under the first change, it suggests that there's one car per 4 tenants. And the next change is depends on how many beds are in a bedroom.
Wait a minute, who is going to be keeping track of how many beds somebody has in a house? So this quarter of a stall per bed? What if you have bunk beds?
Well,
This is only for congregate living facility. And so when you apply for a congregate living facility, you have to go through the conditional use permit process and you have to state how many beds are being provided for that use because it's shared living.
And it's reviewed by fire as well.
So anyway, we've got a request. We'll see how it fares in this process. I mean, he's entitled to his request. Is he not?
Well,
Yeah.
And as the committee and then the council, we're supposed to approve the docket of amendments that are going to be considered. The council could choose not to proceed with any one of the items on this list, or you could choose to proceed with all of them. And so that's the recommendation from the land use committee that we are seeking today is, should we move forward with everything? Are there amendments that you don't want to consider? Or should we move forward with none of them?
So
Okay,
that
well,
you're looking for a recommendation from this committee.
Yeah.
Here's the list, and they support all, part, none, whatever that may be, correct?
That is correct. And
Okay.
moreover, we're proposing to roll this into our 2024 comp plan update because we're so involved in that right now. We don't want to be doing separate code amendments while we're trying to rewrite the code to implement the new plan. And so our preference is not to try to get this done by the end of the year, but to roll it into next year's process.
Yeah. Jay?
yeah, just a question. On the one back that Scott had talked about on the public buildings. I'm supportive of that. What concerns me is at some point in time when a public building can become visible from right away with future development. An example, probably not a good example, but I think about how up at McCormick Woods, and this is private, but they have their a building there for maintenance and stuff, and now it's very visible from the road and things. So I just I don't know I know we wouldn't be building a shack. That's not what I'm trying to infer, but I just kind of wonder if there's some caveat we might want to add. Regarding the two submissions for aggregate living, I'm not interested in either one of them personally.
And to your point about the buildings, I think an example where we could have done better is the lift station on Old Clifton Road with the razor wire and the chain link fence.
Constantine wire, yes.
That and when I pushed back on it, it's the world we live in, that we need higher security at these facilities, and I can appreciate that. But how do we achieve that without make it look like a prison compound?
And I'll share my screen here to show what that building looks like. I think the bigger concern is that our design standards require a certain amount of window area for each of these buildings. And functionally, these buildings can't have windows because they are CMU block or cinder block type walls, and they're hiding mechanical equipment. And you really don't want people looking inside of these buildings to see what is in there.
Or an access point to do malicious things to our sewer or water infrastructure. But as far as the fencing, on the other hand, and the landscape requirements in front of that fencing, I mean, we could have done a lot with landscaping in front of that fencing, if that's what we have to have for fencing.
And
It's interesting that the landscaping is on the inside of the fence. So normally you might,
Yes.
I mean, you might do that if that was a subdivision or a, PBD or something, but maybe the fence should have been on the other side of the landscaping. Why this brings up a question I've always wondered about, particularly with this site when I first saw it. Why is barbed wire good for part of the fencing, but not good for the balance of the fencing where they use the razor wire?
there's the barbed wire's all the way around it.
I think both are all the way
Oh,
around.
okay. I couldn't tell that.
It's all the way around, yeah. That's
And
the same.
barbed wire is not adequate? Oh, it's got both.
Yeah.
Okay.
I fought with Mark Dorsey on this one and lost.
Okay, so back to my question, where we just have, and maybe, we say create an exemption. Is it better to specify what that a public building may or may not have these following items in it as a, or is it looking at Nick saying a total exemption and we design it, we know what we need? I defer to you guys. You know what I'm saying? It kind of leaves it as a giant hole to me.
Well, I think ultimately we are the ones designing these, and as a city council who serves on utilities committees and as the mayor who is directing staff, you have the ability to tell us to make things look less ugly. And I don't know that we need rules that make it harder to design projects that we're working around.
Okay. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but for the life of me, and maybe it's not remembering, I don't ever remember seeing the design for the lift station come to the council. So maybe
We didn't. And matter of fact, you guys don't see that level of detail. We're building a lift station. Here's where it's at.
right. And
Here's
so
what's the cost. That's what the city council sees. And I didn't, I'm not reviewing site plans. And when the construction happened, I'm like, what the hell?
well, there's my quandary. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we could take a look at some additional wording to help clarify that a little bit.
Aesthetics. We think we need better, I get it. We need secure facilities, but they need to be aesthetically pleasing. And that's subjective, I know that, but we could have done a much more with landscaping so that you just don't see the doggone place. That it
Right,
blends in.
But Mayor, this one says, that you can't see from the right of way. I'm just concerned that if in absence of any standards,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just, it just kind of leaves it open-ended to me. That's all.
Yeah.
I know
And
Nick would
it's-
never build, I know Nick would never design an unappealing, unaesthetic building.
But Dick doesn't design anything. Our engineers do.
There you go.
I agree with Jay that the language seems a little broad when it says create exemption. If we said something like allow certain exemptions for public buildings from design standards, that sounds a little more restricted than what's here. The table, it just looks way too broad to me, like create exemption for all. It sounds like we're just exempting all public buildings from all design standards. And that's not what I realize, that's not what we're intending, but that's what it looks like to me here.
Yeah, this is a to-do list of things we're going to amend. This is not proposed code language. So
Yeah.
Okay.
the idea here is that this is a task and we are going to go work on exemption language to accomplish, an exemption for city structures from public works standard or from design standards. We haven't written the standard yet that we want.
Okay. I will, then I think you've gotten our feedback loud and clear.
Yeah.
All right.
And then, Fred, I don't know how you feel about parking standards. I think you'll be the tiebreaker because I'm willing to give John his day in court.
I think they need more study because just based on this one example for one project that has already been approved, I think is not a good use of time.
So you're saying no?
I would say no.
Okay. Right, so neither of the public proposed code amendments for the docket are moving forward.
All right. Jim, did you have anything else?
Well, I just wanted to add that I had sent the agenda to Mr. Williams at the beginning of the week when I emailed the committee. He had indicated that he was going to attend tonight's meeting. When I sent the revised agenda, he asked for the packet. I directed him to the city website. He subsequently emailed me a couple of times and indicated he would not be attending tonight based on staff's recommendation.
So, but I believe what's happening here is it's not that it's being removed. You have a committee recommendation not to move it forward. It's full council could tell this committee, we don't agree with you.
That's
I
correct. Yes.
Understood. Just
And he
wanted
could
you to
have
know that
said-
he was invited to the meeting.
And he can still come to council.
That's correct. And I think his frustration was that we were pushing this into 2024 rather than addressing it immediately. But that's also related to his belief that this is going to change what has already been approved, which changing the code now will not change the Amici House project.
Well, that sounds like an important conversation to have with him right away. Or somewhat
Yeah,
soon.
we'll make that clear to him. We'll follow up to his emails from today.
I hate to jump in for a minute. I had another item I would like to add to the agenda at the end. Mr.
Okay.
Chair. Okay. So,
Do you want to tell us what that is?
yes, it concerns the comments from a citizen regarding I guess I'd call it design standards for the upcoming court expansion.
Okay.
I'll be a little bit more specific when we get there.
All right.
Won't be tied.
Okay. Any other concerns about any of the other proposed amendments?
None. Pending language.
Yeah. Okay. Item number 2. Prospect parking. Fred, you brought this forward.
Yeah, I asked this to be on the agenda, and then it took me a while to remember what it was about. Regarding the city's parking, what I have heard from certain events is that there is towing of vehicles because they need to be like the night market for one, or maybe the farmer's market. And when a car was towed actually off of private property next to the library that a member of the public thought was unmarked free city parking, it turns out that her towing fees were like $550. And, excuse me, she also had to get a ride to where the car was moved to. And so I remember thinking, wouldn't it be nice if for an event like the night market, we had an arrangement with a towing company that they would move cars, but they move it to a walkable location where people could go and get them. And apparently they did do that for the night market. I don't know what location they ended up with. I think they may have gotten an agreement with the boat launch. But anyway, I was thinking, would we consider letting cars be towed to that lot on Prospect if space were available for an event like that, so people don't then have to get in a cab to get their towed car? I
Right.
think it would be
My
more.
first question is,
Whoa,
what is the
whoa.
obligation
This
of a
is
tow
apples
company?
and oranges. Apples and oranges, Fred. The situation you're talking about had nothing to do with the night market. It was somebody, and I've talked to that person who manages that building. It's one of Monseur's buildings, and it is marked as well as it should be, but it is marked no parking, and it is private property. The night market and what they do, towing cars on public property, is a completely different animal than the situation you're describing. So it's apples and oranges.
So it was
Actually,
part-
Ron, it wasn't Monseur's building. It was like Steve Peterson's or Steve Peterson's son's building.
Yeah,
but
it's the one, you're right. That is.
Yep.
It
Property.
was-
So, yeah, it was just a suggestion though that we make that lot available. I guess it already is available for parking for events like that.
Yeah, but Fred, the situation you're pointing to has nothing to do with the night market. They already have an accommodation or a situation worked out with the Port of Bremerton. Why do we need to tow cars to our lot. If they've already got an accommodation for the night market, the situation that you're concerned about has nothing to do with the night market, and it was somebody parked on private
I
property.
agree, Rob, I agree, and I'm not arguing with you, but what I'm saying is that in case the overflow at the boat launch is full, would we let people then move the additional cars that are towed from public property onto the Prospect lot? I'm not talking about private lots being towed to Bethel Towing on Bethel. It is the incident that got me thinking that it would be nice if we also provided parking for cars that are being towed off public property.
I think that's what you're referring to, is setting aside the private property situation would be no different than the Port of Bremerton. It's gonna be case by case, and it's administrative. If the event holder wants to use one of our parking lots, they're gonna reach out to the city. And I don't think we're gonna unreasonably not allow them to do that, no different than the Port of Bremerton. But our lot really isn't conducive to backing a tow truck around in that gravel lot. It's got pretty tight constraints. I don't think that would be anybody's first choice to tow cars to.
I'm surprised the tow company would, because they've got to keep those vehicles secure once it's in their possession, that they would simply do that, don't they? Or am I?
This is the night market and the farmers market have done this in the past, where they contract with Bethel Towing. I believe they're paying for the tow. And they're moving a car from one place to another place. That's what, it's not being impounded.
Okay.
They're moving a car because they're holding an event. They put the signs up, and now there's a car where it shouldn't be.
I see.
Then so they're being nice because they could impound the car because they violated the signs, but they're trying to be, nice, and so they move cars at their expense.
And Rob, I agree. The Port of Bremerton lot is much easier to get to than the Prospect Street lot. And it may be a non-issue. But when I put it on the agenda, I wasn't even aware of the boat launch being used. And I would still like to encourage the city to let people use that lot on weekends and after hours.
It's signed that way.
Okay.
All right. Have we beat that one up enough?
Yeah.
Okay. The next item is from the Housing Action Plan. Jay Rosapep has brought up the question about undeveloped city property. And I think as it could be available for affordable housing. And then in the packet, there was a couple properties that were shown, which could be candidates.
I know we've identified some public properties. If you could share the map, that we're going to surplus, but we're not in the business of developing. Yeah, that property is commercial. That would not be a site we would want. And where is that?
Mitchell.
Across from the high school?
Yes.
I don't think we own that whole site.
Yeah, we do. We've identified, I think these are the two big properties that we own that we really haven't identified a use for.
Right.
And then there are 9 random small lots, mostly over in the Annapolis area. Some of them are actually outside of the city that we own. And what it comes down to is it's a lot of work for the clerk's office to go through the process of surplusing and putting these up for sale. We've just been too busy to do it.
Yeah. And
then
this is a viable piece of property to sell. The one in Tremont, we want to hold on to that until we figure out where our police department's going to be in the future. That is a viable site for a police department in the future, and the land, and we own that. It could be, if we find a different site for our police department or buy a different building, which might happen, we might be coming to you with a proposal if there's a building downtown. But it's old and it needs significant upgrades if we did that. But if we bought that other building, then we could surplus this. And That's a prime piece of commercial property on Tremont. And we should
I'd
sell.
like Jay's thinking about what he wanted to discuss with this item.
But we don't have any resources to build housing.
And
We would
I don't
sell the
think that-
property.
that was
I don't
not the
think-
intent.
Okay.
The intent was, what property do we have that we could make available to someone,
Okay.
nonprofit, to do something with it when since we're not doing something with it currently. That's the intent. And to make sure that we could make it available. Hey, we have this piece of property, we're not doing anything with it, 5 to 10 years. We'd be more than glad to let you develop it for tiny homes, whatever the case may be. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out what we can do to incentivize somebody to have some type of, it's not affordable housing by any stretch of the imagination. These are tiny homes.
Yeah.
That's the intent of this discussion.
Yeah, I definitely not something I would recommend we do with the Tremont project. And I would, as far as tiny homes across the street from the high school, probably the community is going to come unhinged on that.
It also, for what it's worth, it looks like it has some limited developability given the slope.
Slopes.
Yeah, the high school property seem less feasible than Tremont. The question is, do you see Tremont as being anything happening with that within the next 5 to 10 years?
I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll be moving forward with a police department in some form.
So it's open for 2 years, for example, playing devil's advocate.
Sure.
And I think, we met with the county a couple of years ago when they were trying to do a tiny house project on Bethel, and we're looking at buying or somebody was going to provide access to a site. But the upfront costs of actually putting in the infrastructure to support even a tiny house project, it's pretty huge. And most organizations aren't going to have those resources unless we're giving away water and sewer connections.
Yeah.
And, they're going to have to provide a restroom and shower facility. And those are not inexpensive projects, and it's a lot of water. It's a lot of CFCs and general facility fees for sewer. It's not easy. Just because you want to do something for 2 years, you're going to have to do it for much longer than 2 years to pay for the actual development costs of making the site usable. I mean, if you want to do a safe parking area for RVs, that could be a different story, because that where we're not providing any water and sewer, maybe there's a possibility for something like that. But
Yeah,
I think those are good
think the
locations.
community would come unhinged on that as well.
Right.
I just, I think the project that we had articles to was the Walla Walla one, and that was a 7-year project by the time that came to fruition through public and private partnerships. I was just looking for what land did we have that would incentivize somebody, say, hey, we're not doing anything with this land. We'd be more than glad to turn it over or lease it for $1 to have you develop this into a tiny home village or whatever. I've seen, we've all seen success stories with it. I just don't want the city to be a barrier if somebody came to us with a viable plan, if we had land that we're not utilizing. That's it. That's my story.
I think it's a good question because there may be lots that already have water and sewer connections. So if, for example, they put a portable building there, would they have to pay another connection fee just to connect it to an existing water and sewer?
Yes, because
Yeah.
It's lapsed for, I think it's 2 years or something. If there hasn't been a structure on there for a period of time, they have to pay the connection. They haven't been paying the ongoing cost to maintain the system. So yes, they have to pay those fees again.
And it's a change of use. So you're going to pay even if they had a single family connection, you're paying the difference between the single family connection and whatever the proposed use of the property would be. But the city doesn't have any properties like that. We have the 2 that are in the housing action plan. There's the other 9 or so fragments are like 3,000 square foot lots that are kind of over in the Annapolis area. And then we have the industrial park where the city would ultimately like to develop more of an employment use where the old dump is and going up the hill towards the water tower. But there just aren't other city properties unless you're talking about turning a park property or something that we own that is used for something else into housing.
And the Annapolis properties, because I'm more intrigued about the individual lot disposal. Are those at all feasible? I know you said 3,000 square feet. We're seeing developments in some cases that are pretty small, just in the region. That
Well, again, half of them are in the county, so half of them are in the urban growth
Oh.
area, but the city owns them because they
Okay.
were acquired by like an Annapolis water district or
I
something.
see.
And then there's a handful of like tax foreclosures. In some cases, there are building encroachments where neighboring properties have encroached onto lot lines, and so there's nothing that I would consider to be a really attractive lot for development. All of them have flaws or challenges that have to be overcome in order for development to occur.
Okay. Well, I know that there's a lot on our plate these days, but it would sure be nice to approach those and slowly rid ourselves of those.
Yeah,
Um,
it's on the
right.
work plan. It just doesn't, it's not on
Yeah.
fire. It
Right.
doesn't get
Right.
touched usually. It's
I,
just,
I totally get it. If we're done with that part of the
Yeah.
discussion,
I'm done with that.
okay, I wanted to go to the page 22 of the action plan shows a tiny home on wheels, and then the temporary tiny homes, the transitional shelters, the sheds. And I know that these are recommendations, but do either of those meet building code for siting on a property?
There is appendix, I believe, Q of the IRC for tiny homes. And so yes, tiny homes can be permitted if they meet excuse me, appendix Q. But as far as our codes, you get 1 per lot. So, or it can be an
Right.
accessory dwelling unit. So
Right,
yes,
and
you
so
could do
appen-
something like that.
On wheels.
Well, and on wheels, it's I think that's potentially falling into the mobile home park category, where if you're having more than one of them in a cluster, it becomes a mobile home park.
Right, but could you do one of those, like the picture shows? Could you do one of those on a lot?
We haven't really looked into this very closely in terms of our
Okay.
building code and how appendix Q relates to our land use code. But if it's something you want us to look at, we can certainly give you an answer, but nobody's come to us asking this question.
Yeah, I know that the county gets this not infrequently, and we always point to the building code and say, look, it can't be done like you think it can. And then a lot of those, the chassis, for example, is sometimes not certified or licensed, if that's the right description, but they're made by somebody who really has no business making trailers. But what about the tiny home that we see here in the picture, the kind of mauve colored one? Are those now meeting building code? Because those have certain requirements that need to be met, and the initial round of these that were constructed in Port Orchard, some by the high school, did not meet building code. They were kind of single walled, plywood structures. And I'm just curious if we've overcome a barrier with these.
Yes, I believe that a freestanding structure, it has to go through, I believe, like a pressure test to make sure that it is airtight from an energy standpoint. I believe that those can be permitted either as an accessory dwelling unit, or if there's a vacant lot, you could build one of these on a vacant lot as a house. But we don't really have code specific to tiny homes that talks about it as a building type and talks about design standards for them. So I think as an accessory building, yes, you can do one of those, not on wheels, provided it meets appendix Q of the building code.
And these are primarily homeless temporary shelters. location on vacant land and parking lots and church on property with transit.
Well, and that's the thing is there's a when you're talking about like permanent supportive housing or I forget the
This is-
term that's in our code.
This is described as a tiny home village, I guess, is what.
Right.
this is.
Yes, there is the special provision where religious organizations can sponsor something like this, and that is allowed in our code as well, whether it's on wheels or not on wheels.
Right, but then does that meet code? Does that structure meet code to be able to be cited?
Yeah, well, it would have to meet Appendix Q in that case.
Okay,
But yes, it could be permitted from a land use standpoint.
right. But then, and I'm sorry I'm dragging this out, but then the structures that were built 5, 6 years ago now or whatever, those don't meet code then.
Correct. They would not meet code because they don't meet Appendix Q of the building code and they weren't permitted at the time. I mean, they're just modular
right.
structures.
Yeah,
They're
they
basically
were
sheds at
sheds.
this
They
point,
were
yeah.
sheds, essentially. Okay. All right. Well, okay. That's all I had on that agenda item. Anybody else?
What about the Diaz Meadows item?
Yeah, that's next. Okay, the DA for Diaz Meadows.
Yeah, sorry this came out to you late. It occurred to me that we had scheduled the public hearing for this development agreement for the council meeting on Tuesday, but it hadn't been to a committee yet. And so Diaz Meadows is located on Old Clifton Road, kind of adjacent to the just past the industrial park going out towards McCormick Woods. There's like 8 properties there that front Old Clifton Road that are in the city. And they are zoned for high density residential development. So we have a proposal for a 96 unit apartment complex. It is along Old Clifton, and there is not currently a water main in Old Clifton. We have identified a capital project to build the intertie from the city out to the McCormick water system. And so in order for this development to move forward, they have to extend that water main part of the way out to McCormick Woods. It's not completing the intertie, but they're going to build a percentage of it. And so because it's part of our CFC calculation, the project is eligible for a capital facility charge credit. And the maximum credit amount that the engineers have determined for this project is, I think, $186,000. And according to our old estimates for this project, the total project cost for the portion of what they're building is about $350,000. So we're getting $350,000 in improvement in exchange for $186,000 in credit. However, the developer, when they wrote a letter to the city council about the MFTE, because they were really hoping to get the MFTE approval, which we're going in a different direction on that. But they stated in that letter that their estimate for building this little piece of the water main is $1.5 million. So we are likely getting a project that is valued between our estimate of 350 and the developers claim that this is a $1.5 million project, and we're only giving $186,000 in credit. So it's I think a pretty good deal for the city in terms of the water improvements we're getting. The other thing that is in this agreement, there were a handful of design standards that this developer needed some relief from. And this is this site on parallel to Old Clifton, there is a stream or a ravine on the backside of the property where it's kind of steep and drops down into a creek. And in order to do buildings and to have rows of parking, things came pretty close to fitting, but not quite. The site also slopes down, and so the buildings are actually lower than the road in some areas, and so they had to get relief from some of our design standards, similar to what we've approved on other projects. And so Section 11 of the agreement includes a description of the handful of design deviations that the development agreement is granting. So essentially, we're giving some design relief and some credit in exchange for a pretty considerable water system improvement. And the project will presumably go forward if this agreement is approved, though the developer also, without the multifamily tax exemption, I don't know for sure that they will actually go forward with the project, but at least they'll have a framework to go forward if they decide that it makes financial sense.
Okay. Is that the only really significant relief from design requirements? Was being exempted due to not being to being lower than the street grade?
Yeah, it was, yeah, there's a ground floor elevation exemption. There's, the entrance being visible from the public street for each building because the building is at the bottom of a retaining wall. That's not really possible in this instance. And there was a landscaping requirement, and because this project buffer or is adjacent to natural areas, they're asking to narrow a couple of landscape buffers. But there's so much open space on this site that is undevelopable that we're still getting a pretty large amount of open space on the property. So it was some landscape screening requirements related to retaining walls and buffer width relief.
Okay,
So anyway, that'll go forward for a public hearing on Tuesday, and is likely going to also be something that we'll ask you to vote on Tuesday. But we did get a comment letter on this project, and so it is possible we will have the hearing, but not have the business item. And I'm waiting. We're still discussing internally the comment letter that we've received to make sure that this can go forward without any further amendment to the agreement. So but we had already noticed the public hearing, so we're going to go ahead and have that hearing on the agreement as is.
okay.
Anything that stood out to you, Nick or Jim, that would be a non-starter or that we wouldn't do for anybody else in the same circumstances?
No, not at all. And honestly, I mean, this is another garden apartment project, but it's kind of an interesting location because it's so near the freeway and kind of our industrial park. I kind of like the design of this. I think it's, as far as garden apartments go, it's better than some of the other projects we've seen, in my opinion, just in terms of overall design. But again, it has some challenges with the site topography and the cost of the water main, and so it also wouldn't surprise me if this doesn't go forward for being infeasible. But we'll have to wait and see what the developer decides to do.
Okay, thank you.
Nick, have they provided any visuals?
Yeah, we have. I can pull up a site plan real quick.
Oh, that'd be
Let me see if I can find one.
What
If
I
you
like-
want to move on to a different agenda item, if there's nothing else, we can talk about something else while I try to find the right plan.
You can
All right.
use the landscape plan, and I think it's Exhibit C in the council draft.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, well, he's pulling that up. Do you want to share
Yeah,
comments or concerns
well-
about the courthouse campus redevelopment plan?
no, it wasn't concerns. It's since we haven't really seen a lot, it's just as we go through giving up is not the right word, I'm sorry. Giving some right of way to the county. Mr. Lackey came and had some concerns to address, and I was just curious or wanted to comment that I hope we take a legitimate look at some of his concerns, because a couple of them seem pretty interesting. So
We're not giving them right away. They're going to purchase. They've got the
Right.
land and they're
I'm
buying.
sorry. Yes, they do purchase it. I agree to
They're
that. I'm
Buying
sorry.
the alleyways
Yeah,
and Nick, we can't. The prior city council allowed the county to use that lot behind the county campus as a gravel lot. They were going to build a parking lot and then never followed through on it.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys, as these plans come forward, we just can't allow that to happen.
Well, that's where I was at, bottom line. So thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that.
And just so you know, the county's attorney is drafting a development agreement to outline how to go forward with the county courthouse project. And so it's going to outline the milestones and what the county is committing to building. And phase 0 of this project is to build a paved parking
Right.
lot on that block. And they have reduced it so that it's only half of the block and what they control. So it's a little different than what was in our comprehensive plan that we adopted for them a few years ago, but it will be a paved lot with landscape islands and landscaping and sidewalks and frontage improvements. We have that plan pretty well dialed in at this point. We're just working on the agreement.
Awesome. That's all I asked, is that we have citizens come forward that we consider their comments. That's it.
So here's the site plan for this apartment complex, and you can see Old Clifton Road kind of runs to the southwest before it turns west towards McCormick Woods. There's a ravine, a steep ravine with a stream at the bottom of it on the back side of the site, and all the buildings are kind of brought out to the street. Although, like I said, most of these are lower than the road, and so there's some retaining walls between the street and the apartment complex. The driveway into the complex goes down a ramp. And then there's 2 rows of parking, and the parking that's closer to the stream is actually lower than so it's kind of terraced as it steps down the back of the site. But it's very well landscaped, and has I guess
So
the buildings also feel not as tall because they're recessed below the road. So the project won't be as massive from the street because of the elevation change.
So the rear of the building will be looking at and not up against, but close to a retaining wall. Is that what I'm inferring from this?
Yeah, there's a retaining wall along Old Clifton, or sloped areas that are landscaped. I don't know exactly where the wall is. I can't quite see it on this plan set.
Yeah.
But yes, and what our code otherwise requires is that these buildings be 2 feet above the adjacent road, which then means that you're having to bring in a ton of fill to this site or grade it in a way that just doesn't work here. So,
Right.
so anyway,
I thought at one time we wanted buildings frontage to face the street. So this would be the back of the building that's facing the street?
I wouldn't say that there
That's
is a back of the building, but in this case, it just, the topography just doesn't allow you to build a building at the street without totally filling the site and changing the landscape.
Moving it further down the slope and then having to deal with those consequences.
Yeah, I think the when you I'll pull it up again, but you can see the topography lines here, and I think this is at least 14 feet from the bottom of the building up to Old Clifton Road. That's how much it slopes down. And so you would have to put a wall on the backside by the creek and then bring the entire site up otherwise, which is
Massive.
tens of thousands of yards of material that you would have to bring in as fill, which is not viable. The other challenge that you have here, and they're bringing the water main is coming from the industrial park up Old Clifton to the far end of their property, and then it can be extended later by a future city project. But they're at the very top of the water pressure zone, and so if these buildings were any higher off the ground, you wouldn't have water pressure to the upper floors of the building without putting in additional booster pumps. They may even have individual booster pumps on some of these buildings. I don't recall for sure, but they're at the very top end of the pressure zone before the location where we're going to have to install a booster to pump this water further up to the McCormick area.
Interesting.
It just seems a place to put an apartment, especially if you think about the effect on traffic.
But it is housing.
What's going on, Bethel?
Yeah, it's zoned for high density residential. That's how it was zoned years ago. And it's close to SR 16, so it provides housing for the shipyard, and it's easy to get downtown or to Bremerton or to Tacoma from that location.
Remember several years ago, Kitsap Transit was looking, I think it was Mayor, at the dump property as a
Right lot.
parking right lot, and I'm going like, don't be surprised if anything comes back again. As somebody said one time to me, he says, nobody's building any more land. So what there is going to be developed.
Likely we're going to utilize that property ourselves for public works.
Yeah.
Right. No, I understand.
All right. We're done with that one?
Yes.
I guess we're done with the courthouse campus and the Diaz. Hey, Nick, I'm just curious about where we are with the signage and making sure that we understood we were on solid ground to be able to constitute or be able to infer that signage can be nuisances.
Yeah, well, and there's been a development on that. The planning commission did make a recommendation last night to approve a change to the temporary sign code. So we now have a draft that will be coming to council, and it's obviously it's election season and there's political signs all over. We think it's best to probably bring this forward first meeting of November for approval, so that we're not changing the sign rules right in the middle of the election. And so the recommendation is essentially that the number one, you can't place a sign, I think it's within either 50 or 70 feet of an intersection. So anywhere in the right of way that's at an intersection has to be clear of temporary signs, because we do have evidence that accident rates have increased since temporary signs have been allowed in the right of way. Then we have created sign zones, and essentially we've identified corridors, and it's mostly all of our main arterials are allowed for temporary signs, but they can't be close to the intersection, and they can only be placed in the right of way where there is a place for a safe walking route to get to the location of the sign. If there are not sidewalks or a pedestrian pathway present, the sign would not be allowed in that location, because we don't want people stopping their car or walking down the fog line trying to put in signs where there aren't otherwise pedestrian facilities. So even though all of our arterials are listed as allowing signs, because there has to be a sidewalk present, you really can't place signs on most of the arterials. And then the code will more explicitly give the city the authority to just remove signs that don't comply or that are a safety hazard. And there's also a prohibition on any signs in a median or a roundabout within a sidewalk travel lane. You can't obstruct routes for bicyclists or be hazardous in any way. So it gives us a lot of authority to remove signs in certain locations. I envision us creating a handout that will basically show you which roads allow signs and where the sidewalks are along those roads. So we're going to have to provide a handout that says you can't place it within this many feet of an intersection, and we'll show people how we're measuring an intersection, presumably from the center line of each road that intersects, and saying it has to be outside of this distance. And then furthermore, these are the only streets where it can be, and only if it's where there's a sidewalk.
Okay. So yeah, I was also thinking about 'tis the season for election signs, but it would be nice if we could start enforcing that right after election season is over, after the removal period for political signs. And then are political signs exempt from that code?
Nope. We don't regulate content. So a temporary sign, whether it's political, religious,
Okay.
commercial, is all the same. We're not going to have a permitting requirement for it right now. That may be a step that we take if we continue to see this be a problem. But I think for now, this will significantly narrow the scope of where signs can be located. It also sort of if you think about a four-way intersection, has more people are seeing a single sign than on a road segment where you have directional traffic. And so each sign is sort of less effective, and you would have to provide way more signs to reach the same number of people. And we just don't think people are probably going to do that. But maybe they will.
Okay. Yeah. And I presume you're not getting a lot of people coming in and asking about placing temporary signs, are you?
Oh, never.
Yeah. So these handouts are going to be for people who are violating the ordinance, just to educate them.
Well, and it's a resource like the voter pamphlet that gets put out for candidates.
Sure.
It tells them where to go to find out information. So we'll have it on our website so that candidates can understand the rules and know where they are and are not allowed to have signs.
Interesting. Okay.
And on top of that, we have been stepping up our sign enforcement lately, just in terms of anything that doesn't comply with the code today, as far as temporary signs. We are for A boards, we've been reaching out to business owners who don't have permits, telling them they have to take them in. Feather signs, same thing. And if we see temporary signs that are over the size limits, we are pulling them. So if it's if it exceeds the 4 square feet, we are removing those currently.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't know how others feel, but I think it can really kind of degrade the aesthetic of a community if they get out of control.
And I think we've reached that point.
I agree.
It is nuts in some places, and many of those aren't in the city too. So that's crazy. All right. Anything else? Good of the order?
It was nice to see everybody again and get a good meeting through. Thank you both, Jim and Nick. That was very helpful today.
All right, have a good night. Thank you.
Right.
Bye, everybody.